All right, welcome back. So in the last video, we explained why markets are going to be efficient when we have certain conditions met, right? And the essential argument was that under the right conditions, competitive market prices convey information between different producers and consumers about the value of inputs and the value of outputs, resulting in an efficient allocation of resources. What we're going to talk about in this video is each of the three assumptions that we need in order for this to be true. And in some sense, this is going to be the pessimistic video to last video's optimistic take, right? So another way to think about the first welfare theorem is that it tells us that when we have firms or individuals who don't have to take prices as given, or when people's decisions affect their neighbors, or when individuals have private information, competitive markets won't be efficient. So one thing that I want to be clear about before I dive into things too far in this video is I'm not expecting you guys to reproduce any of the graphs or any of the specific reasoning that I'm going to go through in this video. If I ask you questions about this on the midterm, they'll be fairly general conceptual questions that are really about how specific violations of these assumptions will affect market efficiency. They won't be questions about why these specific assumptions create problems. So don't worry about trying to copy down everything that I do or make sure that you understand every part of the reasoning. We're going to do kind of sketch arguments here just to make clear what we're saying in our first welfare theorem. Okay, so the first assumption that we need to talk about is the assumption that all individuals and firms are what we call price takers, meaning essentially that they have no individual power to change market prices, and as a result, they make their decisions treating those market prices as given. This is what we've assumed over and over, right? That firms can hire as many workers and as much capital as they want at some particular market price, but that price isn't under their control. They can produce as much output as they want and sell it for a particular price, but that price isn't under their control either. Right, and same thing for consumers, right? Consumers are able to buy as much as they want of different goods, depending on whether they can afford them or not, right, at a particular price, but those prices aren't under anybody's control. So the reason that this is necessary to get market efficiency is because when this is true, right, when people are making their decisions based on what they care about, treating the prices as a given, then those prices are going to adjust to reflect the preferences and constraints and costs of all the different actors in society. Essentially, prices are able to convey accurate information across individuals. But when some individuals or some institutions have power to set prices, they'll use that power to manipulate prices towards their own benefit. And when that happens, the prices stop conveying accurate information about how much things cost to produce or how valuable things are to consumers, and instead they start conveying information about the relative power of different individuals in society. Right? Prices don't become an information sharing mechanism, they become a power struggle. So why don't we think about this by thinking about a firm that maybe does have some ability to set prices, right? Doesn't have tons of competitors. So I don't know if any of you guys had to buy those TI, I don't know what it is now, 89 graphing calculators, right? But as every other piece of consumer electronics has become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, right? Graphing calculators have continued to cost ridiculous amounts of money, right? Something like $80 for a graphing calculator. So let's think about that problem, right? Let's think about why that might be the case. So if Texas Instruments was deciding how much to produce at a given market price, what they would do, right, is they would say, well, I've got some marginal cost curve like this, right? As long as I'm better off producing than I am staying out of the market, I'm going to produce where price equals marginal cost, right? Because every unit up till here made me some profit. Every unit past here is going to make me a loss. So what happens if they don't face a constant price, right? What if they have a downward sloping price? Which is essentially saying, what if Texas Instruments has the power to raise their prices a little bit without losing all of their customers? Well, let's imagine they have a similar marginal cost here. Let's think about what they'll produce here. Call it Q question. Well, we can make the same argument we made before, right? Every single every single piece of output up until where marginal cost equals price was earning them a profit, right? If they produced past here, they would earn a loss. But the problem is, now they're going to look at that very last bit of output, and they're going to say, you know, we're not actually making any money on this last bit of output that we're producing, right? Our marginal cost is exactly equal to our price. And if we raise prices a little bit, we wouldn't be able to sell that unit anymore, but we could sell all of our other units at a higher price than we're selling it now. So they're going to use their ability to shape prices to move prices up to something like this. Right? Because of the fact that they're willing to give up the opportunity to sell some units that they would be able to sell for more than they cost them to make in order to sell all of their other units at a higher markup. Well, what this means is that our price, right, our monopoly price, is no longer going to reflect the cost of making a calculator. Right? Instead, it's going to reflect some combination of the cost of making a calculator and Texas Instruments' ability to shape the price of calculators. So when consumers buy calculators up until their marginal cost equals the price, they're going to buy fewer calculators, right, than would be economically efficient, because that very last calculator that they bought costs a lot less to produce than it's worth to that consumer. So this is essentially why we need firms and individuals to not be able to set prices, right, who treat prices as given in order to get economically efficient outcomes. Okay, wonderful. So the second assumption that we need is what we call no externalities, which is another way of saying that individuals' decisions about what to consume or what to produce should only directly affect them. They shouldn't have positive or negative effects on other people, right? So when I decide to consume an avocado, I have to be getting all of the benefit of consuming that avocado and not imposing costs on anybody else from doing so. When you produce an avocado, similarly, right, you have to be paying all of the costs of producing that avocado. So to think about why that's important, let's imagine that I'm running a pizzeria, right? And while I'm making pizzas, there's a lot of olive oil and other grease that builds up in a grease trap, behind my oven. So as part of my production process, right, every night once I'm done making pizzas, I empty the grease trap by just kind of sprinkling the grease out in the street behind my pizzeria, right? It doesn't directly bother my customers, but lots of other people are walking and living back there, right? I just kind of dump the grease trap. And because I'm dumping a grease trap back there every single night, there's always big clouds of flies buzzing around everywhere. People are slipping on the grease, right? People get sick. There's noxious, disgusting fumes rising up off of the, fetid, rotten, horrible, congealed grease that's just sprayed all over the sidewalk. Right? Let's picture this image. So if we think about my decision about how much pizza to produce, the problem is that each pizza costs me something to make, right? I have to pay the workers, I have to pay for the dough and the cheese, etc. But it also costs something to my neighbors, right? Who have to deal with this horrible, fetid, disgusting cloud of flies and grease. So as a result, if I think about, again, my decision about how much pizza to make, I have some marginal cost that represents the cost of, the cheese, the workers, the dough, the electricity in my pizzeria, all of the things that I pay for. But then, on top of that, are all the costs from the grease, right? So we could say that I have the real cost of the pizza is my marginal cost plus what I'll call an external cost. Right, the cost to my neighbors of having to deal with my horrible, disgusting grease cloud. So I'm deciding how many pizzas to produce at some price, right? I'm going to decide to produce here, right at Q star, where the price equals my marginal cost. But at that price, the true cost of an extra pizza is going to be higher than the price, right, at this amount of output. Because my neighbors are having to deal with the horrible, disgusting grease clouds, right? And that has a cost as well. So if I was taking that into account, I would produce less pizza, right? I would be somewhere like here, Q efficient, or QE. So this is one problem with externalities, right? Is that when I produce something that has a negative externality, right? The process of producing something hurts the people around me. I'm going to end up producing too much when I'm just considering my own costs and considering the price. because I'm going to ignore the effect that this has on everyone else. Right? Everyone would be better off. We'd be at a Pareto efficient outcome if my neighbors could somehow, pay me, give me some sort of an incentive to not create this horrible cloud of grease. On top of this, right, on top of the fact that I might be producing the wrong amount of output, the presence of externalities is also likely to affect the way that I produce. Right? Let's imagine that for each pizza that I make, right, the cost to my neighbors of dumping the grease out on the sidewalk is something like $1, right? $1 per pizza. But if I just hired a grease disposal company, right, to come collect my grease every month, it would only cost me 5 cents. Right now I'm dumping it out on the sidewalk because I'm a jerk, right? And because I don't have to pay that $1, someone else pays that $1. But it would actually be a lot more efficient if instead of doing it the horrible way that imposes costs on other people, right, I dealt with the grease privately and paid the 5 cents. So not only am I going to be producing the wrong amount of stuff, I'm also likely going to be producing things in the wrong way. In other words, we're going to have a problem in output efficiency. We're also going to have a problem in input efficiency. So this is true of negative externalities, right? When we have a negative externality, when my actions hurt other people, I'm going to do too much of the hurtful stuff in a competitive equilibrium. It's also true of positive externalities, right? When my actions have benefits for other people, I'm going to do too little of that beneficial stuff in a competitive equilibrium, if I'm just thinking about my own benefits. Right? If I decide how beautiful to make the front of my house, I might make it less beautiful than I should, because I'm not considering how much my neighbors like looking at my beautiful house. Right? And this might have a lot to do with why we see things like, for instance, preschool teachers getting paid less relative to telemarketers or people who design pop-up ads than we feel like they should. Right? It could be that preschool teachers generate a lot of significant positive externalities with their work, right? What they do for a living is help children learn how to be kind to each other, learn how to make better decisions, right? Learn how to manage their emotions. Those are things that don't just benefit that child or that child's parents, it potentially benefits all of society as we come in contact with more emotionally well-adjusted and kind and happy children, right? And those children grow up to adults. On the other hand, right, if someone's designing pop-up ads, they're probably generating a negative externality for everyone, right? They're annoying all of us, or giving us spam phone calls. And so what we predict is that in a competitive market equilibrium, we have too much of the obnoxious and disgusting and deleterious actions of others, and too few of the beautiful and kind and loving and giving actions of others, relative to what would be economically efficient, right? What would make everyone better off. Okay, so the last thing that we need in order for competitive markets to be efficient, or of course another way of saying this is the last reason that competitive markets might not be efficient, is that we need everyone to have the same information about the stuff that's being bought or sold when that information is pertinent. In other words, right, we can't have buyers or sellers knowing private information that they don't share with the people that they're trading with. So to think about why this is important, why don't we imagine you decided to go buy a used car, right? And let's imagine, for simplicity, there's just two kinds of cars. There's good cars and there's bad cars. And let's say that you'd be willing to spend up to $1,000 to get your hands on a good car, or up to $500 to get your hands on a bad car. Right? You're willing to pay for a clunker, you're just not willing to pay that much for a clunker. Let's imagine I'm the one selling you the car. And I'm looking to move or something, so I'm really trying to offload this vehicle. So I'd be willing to sell a good car for anything above, say, $800, or sell a bad car for anything above, say, $400. Right, let's imagine. So clearly, we're going to be fine, right? We're going to be able to make a deal if we both agree that the car is good, or if we both agree that the car is bad, right? If we both agree that the car is good, then I'll sell you the car somewhere between $800 and $1,000. Let's say that we'll agree on a price like $900. Right? And if the car's bad, then again, right, we'll be able to work out a deal somewhere between $400 and $500. Let's say $450. And, if neither of us could tell if the car is good or bad, that still wouldn't be that big of a deal. But if neither of us can tell if the car is good or bad, then maybe you'd be willing to pay something like $900, and I'd be willing to sell it, you'd be willing to pay something like $750, I'd be willing to sell it to you for something like $600, so we work out some sort of a deal, like, let's say, I'll sell you the car for $700. Right, we're both willing to, pick something in the middle, because, neither of us know anything about cars, we're both willing to take some amount of risk. You figure it's about 50-50 that the car is good or bad, I figure it's about 50-50 that the car is good or bad. But let's think about what happens if I know that the car sucks, right? I know if the car is good or bad, but you don't know if the car is good or bad, right? You don't know whether I'm trying to sell you a car because I've heard it making a weird noise that it only makes once a month, so when you test drive it, you might not hear it. Well, in that case, if you're willing to pay up to $750 for a car that you can't tell is good or bad, you're going to be buying a car for less than any seller is going to be willing to part with a good car, right? So if I know that my car is good, and you offer me $750, I'm going to say no, right? But if I know that my car is bad, my eyes are going to light up with dollar signs, and I'm going to sign the deal right away. So what does that do to your likelihood of getting a good car when you offer $750? Well, no, it's not 50-50 that you're going to get a good car, right? It's 100% that you're going to get a bad car. Because you know that anyone who knows their car is good isn't going to make a deal with you. So you're not going to offer $750, right? If you have asymmetric information, if the seller knows and the buyer doesn't know, then you're going to only be willing to offer $500, right? Because you're going to say, I'm assuming, if I can't tell if a car is good or bad, I'm going to have to assume that it's bad, because if it's good, it's not going to be offered for sale to me. And as a result, the good cars can't get sold at all, right? The buyers can't buy them because they can't tell if the car's good. The sellers who have a good car can't sell them because they can't prove to anyone they're good. And if they say that they're good, buyers are going to assume that they're lying when they're being offered any sort of a price that the buyer would be willing to offer. So what's the conclusion of this? It's something that economists call a market for lemons, which is to say essentially that when sellers know, right, if their goods are high quality or low quality, but buyers don't, there's going to be a race to the bottom. The existence of low quality goods undermines confidence in the high quality goods, and as a result, only the low quality goods can be sold, right? So if we imagine that we've got a world with lots of information asymmetry, we might imagine just rivers of cheap crap being produced all the time, right? Kids' toys are going to have lead in them, food is going to have all sorts of carcinogenic ingredients in it, right, to make the production of the food cheaper. Right, anyone that you hire for a job is likely to be a crook, is likely to rip you off, right? If we don't have any way of trusting each other, then market interactions result in degeneration to the worst behavior and the worst quality. Right, and another thing we might expect to see is that people would care a lot about brand names and credentials and other sorts of indicators of quality, right? So that even really, really talented people who, let's say for some reason couldn't go to college, but have a hard time convincing anyone to hire them for a job that uses their talents, right? Or really, really high quality products trying to be sold on a marketplace like Amazon without a big brand's approval are going to be treated like a cheap knockoff. Okay, awesome. So that's all I'm going to say about reasons that markets might be inefficient, right? Essentially what we've left ourselves with is markets are going to become inefficient when people have the power to exploit each other, right? They can manipulate prices. They're going to be inefficient when people have a chance to hurt each other or to not help each other, right? When their actions affect other people in positive or negative ways. And markets are going to be inefficient when people have an opportunity to lie to each other, right? When they can manipulate or deceive each other. In other words, in order to get this result that we're looking for, this result of market efficiency, what we need is we need people to have trust, we need people to not take advantage of each other, we need people to be honest and to be conscientious. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to talk about the second welfare theorem, where we're going to shift focus from whether markets are efficient to whether markets are equitable or just.